Physics Bites,
a science podcast in English
by the students of Notre Dame
d'Ascension. Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of Physics Bites, the English language physics podcast of the students of Notre Dame d'Ascension. We have three students today who are going to be talking to us about once we get to the moon, how to stay there. So this is in the group that's working on the project of how to get to the moon, colonize the moon, and everything about the moon. So do you guys want to present yourselves and then we can get started?
Hello everyone, so my name is Edgar and I'm a premiere student in Notre Dame d'Ascension,
Right.
and I've chosen to do the option DNL this year.
Okay, great. Gaspard, do you want to give a short introduction?
Yes, hello, I'm Gaspard David, and I'm also a premiere student at Notre Dame d'Ascension in a DNL group.
Right, and our third student?
Hello, I'm Louis Triboulet, also a student of Premiere at Notre Dame d'Ascension, and I also took the DNL option.
Okay, great. So good to have you guys here. All three of you guys were in class with me last year when we started this. If I'm not mistaken, however, this year only Gaspard and Edgar, you guys are still continuing to do physics, but Louis, you're more into the humanities, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right, which is obviously not going to prevent you from continuing to do DNL physics, and hopefully you'll continue next year. So let's get started. So you guys had the second phase of the project. So the first group that we interviewed last week, they talked about how to get to the moon, and now we're assuming we fixed that problem. And the question is, how are we going to stick around? How are we going to find a place to live and sort of, make it a durable stay on the moon? That's what you guys mainly worked on. So how about we go through a little quick summary of what each of you guys talked about, all the different ideas that you presented, and then we'll get into the questions from your classmates.
Okay, so when we presented our subjects, we said that we would need to create buildings. To do so, we would use a 3D printer that has already been developed by an Australian company. And then we said that there are many ways of living in the moon, many options to build these civilizations. So we each presented one. For example, I talked about how we could terraform the moon, meaning that how we could create an Earth-like atmosphere on the moon so that humans could live with it, could live on the moon without having the dangers that are present for the moment.
Right. So basically, you guys all had different types of ideas, some which were much more, I guess, in terms of technologically speaking and in terms of the difficulty are more accessible, going to some more sort of science fiction ideas where, for example, the terraforming idea is one of those. If we ever manage to do it, it'd be very far in the future. So how about we start with some of the more, let's say, accessible or tested ideas, and then we'll come back later on to more sort of wild and crazy science fiction type of ideas.
That was a bit my part.
Right. So, Gaspard, do you want to tell us about what you discovered in your research?
So, as for me, I did the part on two different solutions. The first one was the idea of create like a bubble on the moon where we can control the oxygen and make a small atmosphere and create the city in it.
Right, sort of like a dome of some sorts, like a biodome of sorts. Okay,
exactly. And but this was a bit complicated because of all the issue we have to face on the moon. And then my second idea...
So what are some of the issues? What are some of the issues that make building a dome on the moon kind of a difficult task and not necessarily the most feasible solution?
The first one would be the radiation coming from the sun and space.
Right.
There is also...
This was the same sort of radiation that we encountered when the first group was talking about the travel part to the moon, where there's just a lot of radiation in space that's dangerous for us if we're exposed to it in a long time.
Yes, and there was also an issue about the heat variation
What is the issue with that?
That this huge dome would need to have a huge insulation,
right?
Because when there is sun, it can get pretty warm and pretty cold when there is no sun.
Right, and this is mainly because of the lack of atmosphere on the moon, which is what on Earth helps moderate the temperature to a huge, huge degree. Okay, so you talked about the problem of radiation. You talked about the problem of just climate control inside the dome. What are some other difficulties with this dome concept?
Another one would be all the meteorites and things coming from the space that would crash onto the dome if there is no protection. Because as the moon doesn't have atmospheres, as you said, there is no protection, and it would need to have huge protection from for the meteorite coming.
Right, and there's lots of that in space. One of the reasons the surface of the moon is so rough and sort of full of craters is because of all these various, even small bits of rock and just dust coming at high speeds. It can be pretty dangerous. What sort of materials would we be using for this sort of a dome on the moon? Or what are the potential sort of materials that we can use?
After some research, I found that it would be a bit like the ISS with very strong materials and not heavy, like things Kevlar, aluminum, or carbon fiber.
The problem is that you would have to do it at a much bigger scale because the space station is pretty small, and the dome would have to be big enough not only to house people but also facilities for just a sort of normal life. What else did you find out about these domes? What were some difficulties, and what would be some advantages maybe of a structure like this?
The main advantages would be the fact that it would be like a small Earth. We could control the oxygen quantity and CO2. So it would be, we could live in it without any helmet or thing like that. So it will be pretty easier to live on a long-term base.
Right. So it's sort of like you said at the beginning, like a sort of an insulated bubble, letting us live in a quote-unquote normal way while protecting us from the elements outside. So Louis, maybe we can go to you because you had another one of these potential structures. If I'm not mistaken, do you want to talk to us about what you found as a potential habitat?
So the idea I was presenting was the idea of basically living on lava caves under the surface of the moon.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what you mean by lava caves? What are these lava caves on the moon?
Well, those are lava caves in the sense of where they are being created by massive flowing of lava under the surface of the moon, but now the lava is long gone, and we can actually go under the moon and go there without being hurt by anything.
So this is sort of like the remains and the vestiges of the geological past of the moon, where there was volcanic activities, and these lava, I guess they created craters and they created sort of tunnels and lots of galleries under the surface of the moon, or is it on the surface, or kind of between starting on the surface and going under the surface?
No, it's under the surface of the moon, so we'll have to dig to go there.
Okay.
But
and what would be the advantage of, like, why are we considering this as a potential way of sort of building a habitat? Why would we want to do this?
Well, there's many pros to apply this solution. Well, one of them is that all the channels, most of the channels are connected.
Right.
That would mean that we could create roads to communicate between the lava caves and create a real network of transportations.
Right, without having to actually use the energy to dig tunnels and connect them. There's already a lot of sort of infrastructure sort of remaining there for us to be used.
It's pretty convenient.
Okay. Some other advantages of habitats in these lava caves would be, besides transportation, what would they be?
Yes. If we live under the surface of the moon on the lava caves, we will be protected from the radiation you were talking about earlier.
Right. Because the surface of the moon, the materials it would absorb pretty much 100% of that radiation. So being under it, we're protected naturally from that sort of protection. Go on.
So that's it for the pros. But
what would be some of the negative, or I guess, difficulties faced with this sort of a challenge?
Yes. So one of the difficulty is that the tunnel are pretty deep into the surface of the moon. So we'll have to dig something like 40 meters before we reach there.
And would that be a difficult thing to do for us on the moon because of?
Well, if we got the right materials already there, I don't think it would be a big issue. But the problem is, well, it's not our part, but is to make huge bulldozer and stuff like that.
So I guess bringing up the equipment to do that kind of a thing in and of itself, because the transportation is not easy, would be a difficult challenge. Okay. Edgar, did you, before getting to the terraforming parts, did you have any other solutions that you found for a feasible sort of a habitat that we could build on the moon with current technologies and knowledge we have of the moon?
Well, if you want to talk about feasible ways, there is like the most probable, like the most feasible way that we found was living under the moon in like craters that we would find, and then using like mechanical shovels to have regolith and to be buried under regolith.
So before we go further, can you tell us what you mean by regolith?
Regolith is like the material that you find, which is the most present on the surface of the moon.
Right, it's basically made of soil.
Yeah.
Moon Earth. Okay. So building a habitat sort of inside a crater. We know there's lots of craters on the moon. Why would we want to do that? Why would that be advantageous to just picking a spot somewhere on the surface and building a habitat there?
So we would want to do that because there are many advantages. First of all, there are many craters. We could find a crater near the South Pole where it's the most interesting to be living. But why living in a crater as for such? It is because it's when you're living inside a crater buried in regolith, you will be protected from everything, like either the radiations, the heat variations, the meteorites shower, everything that Gaspard talked about earlier.
Right.
But also it would be really not costly because we would just like build inflatable tents inside those craters. We could break them without any problems because it wouldn't be too voluminous, and then we would just have to inflate them, and we would live inside tents in craters, so it would not be hard to build, it would not be costly, and it will have all the advantages to protect ourselves on the moon.
All right, so from what you're saying, I get the idea that this would be, if we were to find a solution that would be the easiest to put into place right away, this would be it. But would that be a feasible long-term solution if you want to stay on the moon for a few generations and stuff like that?
Well, it's hard to say because on the one hand, as I said, there are many advantages, but on the other, we get that it can be really hard on a social point of view to live buried, to not see the sun, and when you want to go out of those tents, you will have to wear a spacesuit, so it would be really hard to live normal life like we do on the Earth. So this would not be the solution, the best solution if you want to reproduce as such the life on the Earth, but it would be a solution to live there.
But I suppose if we're going to be building any sort of a colony on the moon, it's going to be a far cry from the way it is on the Earth, even in the best of situations. So I guess that's part of the deal. I think one of you guys talked about, I think it was Edgar, you talked about these 3D printers, the Lighten 3D printers.
Yes.
Can you tell us what you mean by that? I know that that's a project that's actually already tested. I've actually seen one of these at the European Space Agency, but do you want to talk to us about what the idea is there?
So basically, the Lucian 3D printer was specially created to create buildings on the moon, because as everyone knows, it's going to be really hard to create real buildings like made of more than one floor and of concrete on the moon. So some companies thought about it, and one in particular made big advancements. The company is like an Australian one, and it would work like a printer, a 3D printer, but instead of using plastic like it usually does on the Earth, it would use regolith, the what we talked about earlier, which
the
is
natural material that we find at the surface of the moon.
Exactly, it would use this regolith to create buildings which would be 12 meters long by 12 meters large, and which could be up to 10 meters high. So it would be built big buildings. It could be really useful, and I think it's like more or less than a month to create those buildings, so it wouldn't be too hard to create it.
So if I were to ask you to sort of explain to somebody who knows nothing about 3D printers and all these things, to sort of simplify and tell us how this thing works, how would you try and explain it, do you think?
Well, it would hit the regolith to have it modulable, which means that you can like form it how you want.
Right, you can shape it into the shape that you want. Yeah.
Exactly, and by doing so, you can shape the thing as a form of building, and then you wait until it cools down to have the building made of the regolith which you used.
And do these machines, these 3D printers, do they need humans to operate them? Do they have to be there to make them do what they do, or are they remote controlled?
They don't need humans, because like you just need to start it, but you can do it from far away, and then it can build on its own. But since like on the moon you can always have problems, which are like meteorites that would come and rocks that would be stuck in the wheels, you would still have to have humans to check that everything is all right, and to repair the machines if it has any sort of problems.
Okay, so I guess the thinking is that we would send these up in a rocket, have them sort of start building some sort of a structure there for us, and then we'll have humans come and get in there, put their materials in, their equipment or whatever. And so they're sort of like giant robots that know how to do one thing really well, and that's build buildings from the material that we find on the surface of the moon.
Yeah, that's it's basically it.
Okay. Were there any other technologies or solutions that you guys found besides the one that you guys have mentioned so far regarding how we could build a habitat on the moon? Or have we gone through most or all of them?
Yeah, I think we've gone through all of them, since there was the lava caves, living under the ground, the domes, and the terraforming the moon. So that was the four main points that we developed during our presentations.
Right. Louis, were you going to say something, or I think...
No.
Okay. And I guess the final solution would be the most radical one, which was what you mentioned at the very start, the idea of terraforming the surface of the moon. Do one of you guys want to just sort of give a brief definition of what we mean by terraforming and what the idea behind it is, and then maybe someone else can talk to us about how realistic it is, how much research has been done maybe about it?
Well, terraforming the moon would mean like we would make the moon habitable for the human in a natural way. Like we would make the moon a place where the human could live like without spacesuit or...
Right. So like basically transform the surface of the moon to something that looks like Earth, or at least is habitable for humans.
I think the main idea is to create like a whole atmosphere on the moon.
Okay.
Like we have on Earth.
And did you guys look into this to see how realistic it is? If there's research done about this, if it can be, I think...
Well, Yes, we did, but even though it would be the perfect solution because it would look a lot like the Earth to live under, it's not possible because we saw that there is actually already a really thin atmosphere on the surface of the moon.
Correct.
So what we would want to do if we want to terraform the moon is like to make it bigger by putting gas into those atmosphere. But the problem is that if we make this atmosphere bigger, it would be heavier naturally. But the Earth gravity is not strong enough to maintain this.
Moon's gravity, you mean?
The moon's gravity is not strong enough to maintain this atmosphere that would be big enough to protect us. So it would just be blown away every 50 or even 20 years. We don't know.
Right. So the main problem is just that the moon, given its size and mass, is just not big enough to maintain an atmosphere that would be usable or habitable for humans.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like you cannot make it thick enough so that it really helps.
Are there any other solutions? Maybe partial terraforming, or what else did you guys find?
Well, if you really want to terraform the moon, you can think about mixing basically like the dome and the terraforming part, which would make creating an atmosphere in the domes, but it's basically just the dome solution all over again.
So basically, terraforming the moon is more science fiction than science, in the end.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we can always dream. Maybe it's easier with a bigger sort of celestial body like a planet like Mars, but I guess on the moon effectively, because the weight is nearly 100 times less than the Earth, it would be very difficult to do. Let's take a look at a few of the questions that your classmates put up. So you mentioned very often this material called regolith. Do you guys have any idea what the chemical composition of it is? Is it something we can also find on the Earth, or is it something that's kind of exclusively on the moon? Are there any interesting properties it might have, or anything like that?
When we looked at it, we thought that there were properties really interesting because it has it has a higher density than concrete, so it would stick to the ground whether or not the gravity is big enough if we build habitations. But also it is easier to dig inside the concrete because it's like more soft. To dig inside regolith because it's softer than concrete, so it would be easier if we want to use it to dig inside it. It would be really more useful.
Okay.
But then, as for what it's made of, it's made of like rock chips, minerals fragments, and I think there is also volcanic glass.
Okay.
So that's what accumulated and created the regolith as we know it.
Is there any interesting stuff we can get out of it? Can it be used as a sort of a resource, maybe, or that we can be mining?
Not that we know of, but I think that the group doing the energy stuff, like Dom, Domitil Caras, and Flores group, is talking about it. So we decided to let
them some science, so that you don't take up all of it. Okay. All right. There was one question which is very interesting. You guys went into it when you presented, but I think maybe here's an occasion to sort of develop the ideas a bit more. Other than the fact that you mentioned craters and these lava caves as being ideal situations, is there a part of the moon which would be more adapted or better to build a colony? Because we're not going to colonize all of the moon right away, even if we do colonize it. So if we were going to build a first colony somewhere, is there a preference for somewhere? Would it be... So, for example, we know that there might be some water in form of ice in some regions. Could it be something to do with the rotation of the moon? What did you guys find? What are the more interesting regions of the moon when it comes to building a habitation? So how about we start with Gaspard?
If we want to build a colony on the moon, I believe the best part, for a long-term colony would be the South Pole, because it got the best exposure to sunlight for solar panel and for energy. Okay. But the first issue would be that it's one of the most far parts of the moon. So for the beginning of the mission, it would be more far than the equator.
Okay.
and so
let's
it
just
would be more
make
for
it
long term.
clear in a way. When you talk about far, in what sense do you mean far? Because so we know that the moon does one rotation around its axis every 28 days. So basically, the part of the moon that's facing the Earth is always the same part. So what do you mean by when you say far, in terms of what? Far from where? Is there a location we want to land and it's very far from there? Why can't we land directly in the South Pole, for example?
What I meant that as it is, the moon is a circle, a bubble actually.
A sphere.
Sorry?
A sphere.
A sphere, yes.
Yes.
The equator part,
right?
The equator on the Earth would be the easier part to land because it's the closest from Earth.
Okay.
And the parts that are the pole would be more far because it's like to go. It's a question of distance. I don't know to explain it more.
Maybe it's also a question of landing in certain places in terms of the type of trajectory we have to calculate and stuff are easier. Okay, so the problem would be that it's a bit more difficult to get to, but you're saying that in terms of the amount of light that it receives, especially, it's ideal. Any other reason why we would prefer, for example, the polar region instead of the equator?
Well, we know for sure that there are traces of water on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, some of the region are named after ocean names. So I think it would be ideal to build a colony from there, because if we find a way to drain the water that we could possibly find, it would be way easier to exploit it directly where it is.
Okay. I guess you answered the question of the various solutions that you presented, which one is the most feasible. Overall, if you guys had to make a judgment on, as a civilization, scientifically, technologically, if we have the capacity right now to start building a colony on the moon, assuming that we can get there and everything, would you say we're there, we're close to it, or we're pretty far from the idea of actually starting to build a habitat on the moon?
I think with our current technology, it would be really, really hard to start building a colony there for now.
Okay. Edgar and Gaspard, are you guys of the same opinion?
As far as my opinion goes, I think that it depends on how you define building a colony. I think that we could settle on the moon for some time by doing the most feasible solution that we presented. But obviously, as we said, socially speaking, you can't have humans living under the ground 24 all year long. So it would not be possible to live with only this technology on the moon. That's why to create a real colony, a real habitat, which is durable, it would ask us to have better developed technologies.
Okay, and Gaspard, what did you think?
I think maybe the same as Edgar, because for a small base to stay quite a long time on the moon, we could do it actually, but it would cost a lot of money. There is this issue of the economic part of it. How would we finance it? That would be mostly the most important issue. But for the short-term base, we could do it. But for long-term, like a dome or thing like that, where we could have a lot of people living there and even born there, we can't do it actually.
Okay, so if I summarize, I guess Gaspard, you seem the most optimistic, but you guys are more or less agreeing that, okay, if you want to just build a base on the moon and sort of have some, like the way we have the space station around the Earth, we can do that, but we're not anywhere close to actually doing anything that's long-term,
with more than just a few people there that can actually do anything more than just very basic research and observation. Okay, so maybe to close off, I'll ask you the same question I ask every other group. What did you guys find most interesting, most surprising, most shocking, I guess, or striking in all the research that you did in the various topics? What was it that really struck you, each of you, that you didn't really know or you didn't believe was possible or something like that?
Well, what really surprised me is the presence of the cave I was talking about, because I think it's a really cool idea that hadn't come to my mind before I learned the existence of this cave, to live like insects, but in a cool way.
Okay. Edgar, what about you?
Well, it might seem weird, but the thing that struck me the most was that we had actually a lot of researches to know how to live on the moon, and that things were already being developed to create a real colony on the moon, when I thought that it was only like a science fiction thing.
Okay, so you were struck by how advanced the research into this is.
Like for example, the 3D printer and all, there were really scientists looking at the question. So
okay.
I was shocked.
Okay, and Gaspard, what about you?
For me, I believe I was most amazed by the fact that we didn't need that much materials on the moon, because the regolith is actually a very useful, and we wouldn't need that much metals and things like that for the first solution, for the best solution we talked about. Okay. The regolith.
So the versatility of this material, which is already there,
yes,
and covers most of the moon. All right, yeah.
And also maybe the fact that the moon soil is very, very rich in metals or things like that, so we will just need to dig in it more than to transport all the things from the Earth.
Right. I found a lot of interesting stuff. I didn't realize the whole lava cave situation there, and I learned a lot of stuff about this regolith from you guys, effectively. Okay. Well, I think we've sort of talked about everything. Is there anything we didn't mention that you guys want to bring up, or any final comments before we close up the episode?
No, I think that we looked at every point of the presentations.
All right, great. So thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. You guys clearly did a lot of work on there. We all found it very interesting, and I personally am looking forward to your little posters that we're going to put up for your classmates before the end of the school year. So thank you very much to all three of you, and looking forward to the rest.